Hi, it's Dr. Minkoff. If you've been listening to the news or reading natural medicine journals, you've probably heard about this thing called methylation. This came about because probably starting 10 or 15 years ago, we were able to track genes cheaply. So you could get a 23andMe done, you could find out what your genetics were, and you could find out if you had small inherited defects in this process called methylation. Now, methylation, methyl in chemistry is a carbon that's got 3 hydrogens on it. And carbons have 4 places where they can bond to. And so there's a 4th one that's empty. Now, the body has a lot of processes where it needs these things to do something. And it goes all the way from detoxing, stress reactions, neurotransmitters, hormones, energy production, DNA repair, immunity. And these methyl groups are used. So just to give you an example, let's suppose that this is your DNA, and the DNA has a gene that's supposed to be producing something like a neurotransmitter. And if the body has enough of it for the moment, it will take this methyl group, stick it on there, and it stops this thing from being active. So it's like a switch. It gets put on something. Let's say you have something that you ate, and it's something that is a toxic molecule, and the body wants to get rid of it. It can stick a methyl on here, and that tags it, so then when it goes through the liver or the kidney, it gets routed out. So these methyl groups are really important, and some people genetically don't make enough, and interestingly enough, some people make too much, or they're on therapies where they take therapies to increase their methylation, and they get symptoms from it. Now, my experience with the genetics on this are that when I did my own genetics, I found that I had a bunch of these defects in my body, but they weren't being expressed in terms of a function problem or a biochemistry problem. So because you have the gene or the gene variant doesn't mean that you're necessarily sick or you're going to be symptomatic. It's estimated that somewhere between 25 and 30% of all people have a methylation defect. Does that mean they're going to be sick? Not necessarily. Depending on their nutrition and their environmental circumstances, they may be fine. Now, there's been tons of attention to people who undermethylate, and I see in our clinic all the time people who need to be on extra methyl groups because they can't make them. The defect is they can't make enough of them. So we can actually give them supplements, these are usually B vitamins, that are already methylated. They're already in a form that the body can use, so we can just bypass the deficit. Sometimes people are overmethylated, or if they get too many of these methyl groups that we give them, they get symptoms where they're anxious, they seem like they have ADD, they can't stop moving, they're like hyper. And it's because they're overmethylated. And overmethylation can cause levels of stress hormones to go too high, like epinephrine, norepinephrine, dopamine. These things can be jacked way up. So if you were thinking that you did the 23andMe and you did the gene, you found out what your genetics are, and you thought, just in case, I should take some extra methyl B12, methylfolate, trimethylglycine. See, all these have methyls in them, so that I will be better because I have this gene deficit. And you end up with anxiety, hyperness, can't sleep, driven. You may be getting too much. So we want these in balance, and I think one of the important things for people is that if they get their genes done, then they get with someone who understands both the clinical side of it and the biochemistry side of it, so that they can get adjusted correctly. Because you have the gene doesn't necessarily mean that there's something wrong with you. So I think this is helpful to know, and if you're seeing a practitioner, I would ask them about this. We do some nice biochemical tests on people to see, are they undermethylated? One of the things that is the most common for people who are undermethylated is they have this amino acid in their blood in too high a level called homocysteine. And this is a risk factor for cardiovascular disease. Homocysteine, when it's too high, irritates the inside of arteries and leads to premature coronary artery or peripheral artery disease. So in someone who has high homocysteine, and this should always be checked on a first visit on everyone, if their level's high, they need to have more methyls. And we give them more methyls, we check it in a couple of months, the homocysteine comes into a normal level, then they need to stay on that for their whole time. Now sometimes homocysteine is changed just by diet alone. I had a patient who went on a bulletproof diet, they had high homocysteine, the level was 14 to 16. It should be around 8. And they went on a bulletproof diet with an intermittent fast. So they ate dinner at 6 o'clock at night, and they didn't eat anything else until noon the next day. 18-hour intermittent fast. And then the food that they ate was mostly vegetables and proteins with some extra fat during that period. And in a 6-week period, their homocysteine went from 14 down to 8, just with diet alone. So lifestyle and diet can affect these things. We usually try first to do that. If it doesn't come around, you may need supplements. So I hope this has alerted you to this idea of methylation. It can be under or over. You may have biochemical abnormalities if the methylation isn't working right, or you may have symptomatic abnormalities where your mood is wrong or your sleep is wrong, and it may be tied to this. Okay? I hope this helps.